Hi everybody, this is Abdul from L4 speaking class and you're listening to the G1 podcast. Today we're talking about music history with Dwina, Rahma, Riska and Putri, who know about history about music itself. And well, tell everything there is to know about music history. So thanks for joining us, happy listening. Okay, so before we talk about history of the music, well, in all probability, music has played an important role in the life cycle of human perhaps even before we could speak. Significant evidence has been discovered that very early men developed primitive flutes from animal bones and used stones and wood as percussion. Voice would have been the first and most natural means of expression in our distant ancestor. Uses to bond socially or comfort a sleepless child. It is from these humble beginnings that the music we enjoy today evolved. As we move further through the history of music, we find increasing evidence of its key role in sacred and secular settings, although the division into this category was not defined in this way until many years later. Okay, and now Dwina, Rahma, Putri, and Riska tell the listener how the history of the music itself. Go on.
Hello guys, I'm Dwina Shafira Nursantika, and now I wanna tell you about the history of music. Okay, history of music begins from influences from the west to the east, merged into the pre-Christian music of the Greeks and later the Romans. Musical practices and convention, perhaps conveyed by traveling musicians, brought a wealth of diversity and invention. Surviving Greek notation from the period of musical history has given scientists and musicologists alike vital clue to the way that the music of the time may have sounded. It certainly indicates remarkable links to the music that would follow, perhaps most notably through the use of modality in Greek music. In the frescoes and in some written account, including the Bible, we have learned about the instrument that featured in the Romans and Greek times and their significance to the culture. The drum is an instrument of the announcement and splendid ceremony, or the lyre as integral player in the Song of Poets. Across Europe from the earlier part of the 1st century, monasteries and abbeys become the place where music became embedded into the life of those devoted to God and their followers. And we will tell the history of music by period, where there are 5 periods here starting from medieval period. Medieval period will be explained by Rahma.
So, for the first is from medieval period. As we move forward in musical time, we begin to enter the medieval period of music, which can be generally agreed to span the period from around 580 up until the mid-15th century. By this time, music was a dominant art in taverns to cathedrals, practiced by kings to paupers alike. It was during this extended period of music that the sounds of music becomes increasingly familiar. This is partly due to the development of musical notation, much of which has survived, that allow us a window back into this fascinating time. From the written music that survived from the monasteries and other important accounts of musical practices, it's possible to assemble an image of a vibrant culture that ranged from the sacred to the secular. Throughout the medieval period, the music slowly began to adopt ever more elaborate structures and devices that produce works of immense beauty and devotion. Hildegard von Bingen and Perrotin pioneered many of the musical forms we still recognize today, including the motet and the sacred mass. Alongside these important forms came the madrigal that often reflects the moods and the feelings of the people of the time. Its wonderfully polyphonic form is both mesmerizing and delightful.
Hello, I'm Riska Insany. Now let's move on to Renaissance period. Instrument developed in accordance with the composer's imagination. A full gamut of wind, brass, and percussion instruments accompanied the medieval music, although it is still the human voice that dominates many of the compositions. Towards the close of the high medieval period, we find the emergence of instrumental pieces in their own right, which in turn paves the way for many musical forms in the following period, the Renaissance. Before we are leaving this period of music, it is important to mention the troubadours and the trouvères. These traveling storytellers and musicians covered vast distances on their journey across Europe and partly fell into Asia. They told stories, sang ballads, and perhaps most importantly broke with them influences from far and wide that seamlessly blended with the Western musical cultures. The Renaissance was a golden period in music history, freed from the constraints of medieval musical convention. The composers of the Renaissance forged a new way forward. Josquin des Prez is considered to be one of the early Renaissance composers, to be a great master of the polyphonic style, often combining many voices to create elaborate musical textures. Later Palestrina, Thomas Tallis, and William Byrd built on the ideas of des Prez, composing some of the most stunning motets, masses, chansons, and instrumental works in their own right. Modernity was firmly established as a basis for all harmony, and although strict rules governing the use of dissonance, the expressive qualities of Renaissance music is virtually unparalleled.
Renaissance period, we move to Baroque period. The Baroque period 1600 to 1760 hosts some of the most famous composers and pieces that we have in Western classical music. It also sees some of the most important musical and instrumental developments. Italy, Germany, England, and France continue from the Renaissance to dominate the musical landscape, each influencing the other with conventions and style. Amongst the many celebrated composers of the time, G. F. Handel, Bach, Vivaldi, and Purcell provide a substantial introduction to the music of this era. It is during this glittering span of time that Handel composes his oratorio, The Messiah, Vivaldi, The Four Seasons, Bach his six Brandenburg concertos, and the 48 preludes and fugues, together with Purcell's opera, Dido and Aeneas. Instrumental music was composed and performed in tandem with vocal works. It's of equal importance in the Baroque. The virtuosity that began amongst the early Renaissance performers flourished in the Baroque. Consider the keyboard sonatas of Domenico Scarlatti or the concertos that Vivaldi composed for his student performers. This, in turn, leads to significant instrumental developments, and thanks to the aristocratic support of Catherine Medici, the birth of the violin. Common musical forms where we are established founded on the Renaissance composer principles but extend and develop in ways they that they would have probably found unimaginable. The suite become a Baroque favorite, comprising contrasting fast-slow movements like the prelude, lemon, Giju, chorus, and the saraband. Concertos become ever more popular, giving instrumentalists the opportunity to display their technical and expressive powers. And Abdul, would you like to tell the rest of the period? There is classical period and romantic period.
Okay, I will continue. So now a classical period. From the Baroque, we step into the classical period. Here, Haydn and Mozart dominate the musical landscape, and Germany and Austria sit at the creative heart of the period. From the ornate Baroque, composer of the classical period, move away from the polyphonic towards the homophonic, writing music that was, on the surface of it, at least simple, sleek, and measured. One key development is that of the piano. The Baroque harpsichord is replaced by the early piano, which was a more reliable and expressive instrument. Mozart and Haydn each wrote a large number of works for the piano, which allowed for this instrument to develop significantly during this period. Chamber music alongside orchestral music was a feature of the classical era, with a particular attention drawn towards the string quartet. The orchestra itself was firmly established, and towards the latter end of the period began to include clarinets, trombones, and timpani. The rise of the virtuoso performer continued throughout this period of music, as demonstrated by the many of the concertos and sonatas composed during this time. Opera flourished in this decade and became a fully-fledged musical form of entertainment that extended way beyond the dreams of the Baroque composer. And for the last period there is a romantic period. As the classical era closed, Beethoven is the most notable composer who made such a huge contribution to the change into the Romantic era. Beethoven's immense genius shaped the next few decades with his substantial redefining of many of the established music conventions of the classical era. He wrote on sonata from in his concertos, symphonies, string quartets, and sonatas is almost unmatched by any other composer. The Romantic era saw huge development in the quality and range of many instruments that naturally encourage ever more expressive and diverse music from the composer. Musical forms like the Romantic orchestra become expansive landscape where composer gave full and unbridled range to their deepest emotion and dreams. And Babylon in the Symphonie Fantastique is a fine example of this, or later Wagner in the immense operas. The symphonies of Gustav Mahler stand like stone pillars of achievement at the end of the Romantic period. Alongside the tone poems of Richard Strauss, the Romantic period presents us with a vast array of rich music. The only towards the end of the 9th century began to fade. Oof, that's a long story, right? Well, is that the only history of music? How is Rahma?
Of course not. There's a lot of history that we haven't told yet. We only tell the history of music based on period so that it's easier for the listeners to understand.
Oh, okay, I see. Maybe the listener want to know more, but our time is limited. So, thanks for listening to the G1 podcast with your host Abdul and our guest Dwina, Rahma, Riska, and Putri. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed listening to us about history of the music. If you want to know more about music history, join us the next week when we will be invite another guest to tell another topic on music history. And that's all for this episode, folks. See you and next time. Thank you.
Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah.